So we'll get started here. Do we need to use the mic for the camera? Is it all right if I step away?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I like to walk around a little bit while I present. And if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll speak up a little louder. I'll go back to the mic. So the funding formula, as we know, it was really started in the 13 through 15 biennium. There have been several updates to that formula, but really the guts of that formula was established in that 13 through 15 biennium. The legislature contracted with a firm called K12 to do a recalibration study to confirm the adequacy of our base level of support. So these are the per pupil amount that Senator Shively had referenced. They were really working on making sure that was adequate. It gets funded with a combination of state and local taxes. The formula is student driven, so we kind of had that conversation. And then we use various weights to generate essentially more students, which generates more funding. So other weights are summer school are involved in that. At-risk students, so your free and reduced price lunch populations are involved in that. Summer schools and that. English language learners, special education, all those demographics that may cost additional funds to educate adequately. Transition adjustments. If you are in a district with a transition adjustment, and I'll get to a list of them all at the end, this is going to be very important for you. When this formula was established in the 13 through 15 biennium, and you make a significant change to a funding formula, inevitably there's going to be winners and losers in that. It's going to significantly change district funding. Well, what they didn't want to do is take a district that was getting funded at $12,000 a student. They recalibrated, I think, is about $8,800 at that time. You could lose $3,500 a student overnight. Well, they said, we're going to put in these transition adjustments, so we're not going to reduce that funding. They also put them the other way. If you're only getting paid $5,000 a student prior to that, we weren't all going to pay you an extra $3,000 more a student because districts were able to operate at that lesser cost. But again, these were transitions to get everyone eventually to that funding formula. In the 21-22 school year we just finished, the transition minimum adjustments have began to be reduced. Meaning, so if you're at that $12,000 and we're only at $10,000 right now, you're getting $2,000 a kid above what that per pupil payment is, they're starting to bring you back down. Where it used to be they were increasing that per pupil payment to get to everyone, now they're starting to come down from the top two. And also from the bottom, they're coming up faster. The transition maximum adjustments, so the maximum is you hit a maximum dollar amount you can get, which is under than our $10,000. Those will begin in the 23-24. So we'll get everyone to that funding formula 7 years from last year, so 6 more years. Just kind of the overview of that funding formula. You have your student membership. I'll refer to ADM a lot. That's average daily membership. That's like the full-time equivalency for your students from the previous year. If a student was at your school for 6 months, or half the year, I guess it's not 6 months, that's a 0.5 ADM. Then we added those other program weights, summer school, EL, we talked through some of those to get your weighted ADM. Then we have a school size district factor. This is your economies of scale. It's going to cost more to educate a district that has, per student, that has 120 kids versus one that has 12,000. So there's a sliding scale. If you're over 900 students, you are in the largest category, and it slides down all the way to 110 students. That ranges from 1.46 to 1.0. So you can really, if you're under 110 students, you're getting paid 1.4 students for every one of those kids, so $14,000. Take that times your per pupil payment rate. This is an old rate. This year it would be $10,237. Which gets you to your total formula amount. And then we do that transition adjustment. You can go up or down based on if you're a minimum or maximum, you may get additional funds or less funds. To get the total formula amount, we back out the 60 mills that Senator Shively talked about, as well as other local revenue that you might get. The biggest one being oil and gas, coal, those come through. But the wind towers, some communities bring in these pilot programs where you incentivize businesses to come in, you tax on an alternative basis to get them in. So those type of things are involved in that. So once we back out that amount, the state makes up that difference. So again, he talks about $10,237. That's the total payment. The state's only paying that portion of it. Statewide, it's about 72 to 75%. That is not every district. Some districts get more local tax dollars, and they might not even get a state dollar because their local share covers everything. Just kind of a history of funding for schools. Back in the 11-13 biennium, before the property tax relief, before this funding formula, there was $982 million. Going to the 21 through 23 biennium, we are up to $2.2 billion once you count for transportation, special education, as well as our foundation aid formula, state school aid. So you can see there is a significant investment into K12 funding. Now, I want to be clear, some of that money is property tax relief. Senator Shively talked about buying down half of that 30 mils. That would increase this by $360 million. That's not another penny for education. That's property tax relief. And then this is just that same formula pulled forward. And I just like to highlight how it's being funded on this bottom part of the formula. So the general fund in 13 through 15 funded $1.69 billion. In 21-23, we're at $1.64 billion. So the general fund is actually contributing less to education than it did when this formula first started. Reasons for that: the Common Schools Trust Fund. That gets a lot of oil and gas money into that. You can see that's increased its contribution to the state share from $140 million to $433 million. And then in the 17 through 19 session, we went to a constitutional vote that said we could tap into the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund. That was a fund that was set up that if there's ever an allotment across the state that we're going to get cut funds, school districts would be made whole by this fund. But that fund was growing so massively. It was a significant amount. And so what the voters said is anything above 15% of the total appropriation you can spend on education. So that'll never go below 15%. Hopefully we don't see an allocation across state government of 15%. But that was the number that was passed. So that will continue to support education going forward, and how much we can pull out of that Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund. But just wanted, I think that's kind of interesting how the general fund's contribution of the state share. Payment schedule, this is basically just telling you your payments are front loaded. We pay 60% of your payments in the first 4 payments, the last 40% over the last 6. And the reason for that is you're getting property tax coming in towards the end, coming in that December, January timeframe. This is just redirecting payments. If you belong to an REA, you generate some weighted students for that, but that goes directly to the REA, so your school district really probably doesn't see that money. And then the districts have the option, if you belong to a special ed consortium, the money generated for special education weights can be redirected to that special education consortium. Just allows that. This was passed last session, cost sharing agreements. If 2 or more school districts cooperate, so you maintain your own boards, but you kind of maybe align some curriculum stuff, you share a superintendent, you share a business manager, you formalize it through an agreement that's approved by DPI, and you have some savings because of that, because you're sharing a superintendent, you're sharing a business manager, we do have a program that will reduce some of those costs, or reimburse some of those costs. We didn't have any approved for this year, so we'll have 1 more year where that will be eligible if districts can cooperate and share those services. But that does need to be a formal agreement that is approved by DPI. Get into open enrollment a little bit. Open enrollment must be filed by March 1st of the preceding year. School boards must act on that by April 1st. So you have a month. So that March should be considered the open enrollment applications part of it. If a student moves, those dates are waived. If you move into another district and you want to go back to your district, you do have that capability of open enrolling. If the deadline is missed, the most popular form is a tuition waiver. This would still allow that student to attend the district they wish to attend. The only difference is the resident district now has to approve it as well. A resident district cannot stop a student from open enrolling to another district. They do have the capability of preventing that tuition waiver if that deadline is missed. And that was put in particularly more for small districts and protecting that budget. Because again, as that student goes to another district, $10,000 goes with it. So that's why they need to approve that. There is an appeal process through the county committee. If it is denied, they can appeal that. If it is denied and the appeal process is denied, there is a way for the parent to pay that tuition to see probably 3 or 4 of those in the last, that come across my desk in the last 5 years. It's not very popular. State aid will always follow the student. So whoever is educating that student will get the funding for it. There's never an instance where we will pay, I shouldn't say never, poor choice of words. Whoever is educating that student will get the funding. There is some exceptions on the borders. If they're going across state lines, there is some funding that we exchange with some of the other states. Once that student is open enrolled into your district, though, there are only 4 ways that open enrollment can end. This is set in North Dakota Century Code. If the student graduates, the student moves to another district, the student applies for enrollment in another district, so if they open enroll somewhere else, or if that student's parents notifies the school district of residence that they're going to go back to their home district. So basically, once you accept that open enrollment, that student is essentially grandfathered in to any open enrollment changes you may make as a board. If we are going to close open enrollment, you can't close your open enrollment and say, Johnny that's been coming here for 4 years, you have to go back to your resident district. Johnny gets to stay. So just those are the only 4 ways that that open enrollment agreement can end. That is good until one of those 4. So you don't have to do open enrollment every year. Once you're open enrolled in, you're in. The special education, though, is always the financial responsibility of the resident district. So there will be a bill back to that resident district to pay for any special education costs for that student. And then transportation may be provided to it. It doesn't have to be. Transportation is not required. When you set standards for accepting open enrollment, you can consider things like the capacity of your program, your class, grade level school building to say, hey, we're not going to accept open enrollment because of these things. The ones you may not consider is the academic achievement of that student, the extracurricular activities, disabilities, English language proficiency, and the one that's probably most controversial that I get a lot of calls on is previous disciplinary proceedings. That cannot be part of your open enrollment approval or denial. Constructional, I oversee the construction now as well. Any construction project that's over $150,000 needs Department of Public Instruction approval. How the state defines construction, it's the construction, purchase, repair, improvement, modernization, or renovation of any public school building or facility before the commencement of that project. So again, if it's over that $150,000, the state does need to approve that. You must demonstrate the need for the project, stable enrollment. If declining enrollment, that there is no other option. That is your only option, is to go forward with this construction project. And then also show that you have the ability to pay for that project. Currently, all construction is funded locally, outside of some loan programs administered by the state at low interest rates, but local stuff to fund that loan program. This is a little hard to read, so I'll skip through. It's just a flow chart for your business manager, whoever's going through that, when you need department approval. If it's over $350,000, there's a longer form that we request. Just kind of that. Some of the loan programs that are available, we'll develop a trust fund loan. This is administered by the Board of University and School Lands. It's a minimum of $250,000 and a maximum of $2 million. It's a 20-year term with a 2% loan, or 2% interest rate. To be eligible, you have to have our approval. Minimum being $250,000, you have to get our approval for anything over $150,000. You must demonstrate that it's a need based on an unanticipated construction project. So this is not a way to get around a bond. This is a way that something came up, we got a bond, but then I think we had one that we approved where the bus They had contracted with the city to use their parking lot. It was tearing up that parking lot, so that contract ended, so they needed something to discuss. And so it was unanticipated, things like that. Or it can be an emergency. If you have no other option, you can't run the school without this thing getting done, it can be approved that way too. But does not require a bond vote. It's not a way to get around the bond vote. You still have to meet those other requirements. The other loan program that comes through DPI but is administered by the Bank of North Dakota is the School Construction Assistance Revolving Loan Fund. This is a minimum of $1 million and a maximum of $10 million. It's a 20-year term at a 2% interest rate. Eligibility, again, receive our approval. We need to publish in the local newspaper any additional mills, because this one is going to require that bond vote. You're going to need 60% of your voters to pass to be eligible for this one. For several years, for the first couple of years I took this over, bond rates were under 2%, no one was utilizing this loan program. Bond rates are up. Everyone that's passed a bond has applied for this. It is competitive, and it is, so not everyone gets it. Just to keep that in mind. We do a prioritized list based on student occupancy, academic needs of the district, the age of the existing structures, safety concerns, community support, and cost. So those are the things that we consider when we're prioritizing those. Classrooms are probably going to get prioritized over the basketball gym or over the hockey rink. Academic need is one of the top ones on there. School transportation. Districts are reimbursed for miles and rides. So miles being the number of miles that bus runs, rides being the number of kids that are on that bus. This was used for, some districts that are more rural don't have as many, can't get as many kids on that bus, but they're surrounded miles, where kids in a city that have buses picking up is probably more funded off the 40 kids that get on that bus and don't run many miles, or as many miles. But to and from school, special education routes, and career and technical education routes. So if you have the CTE building, and you bus kids over there, period 3, you can get funded for those transportation. In the last session, the state removes state reimbursement for transporting students that are open enrolled or tuition waived. That is agreed upon. So if you go and pick up a student that's open enrolled into your district, you must subtract any additional miles that you were traveling to pick up that student. And we actually created an additional report where we'll have non-reimbursable miles, which would be for open enrolled or tuition waived, and reimbursable miles, which is your resident students. So that is a new change. The reimbursement for this biennium, so last year and this year, will be at a minimum the reimbursement received in the 19-20 school year, or which would have been based off your 18-19 miles and rides. Our funding formula is always based off the previous year's data. That way we're not changing it and updating it throughout the year. So that you do have that budget, you are able to create those budgets fairly certainly. But because of the pandemic and no transportation was running less kids were riding the bus, that they didn't want to cut that funding significantly due to COVID-19, so they did put that minimum threshold of the 19-20 school year, which we do have about 70% of our districts that are getting funded out to 18-19 miles and rides. And this is all subject to the amount that's appropriated for transportation. If there's extra money in state foundation aid and we're short transportation, I can't move money across appropriation, so that's whatever's in that transportation fund. We're getting up on budgeting time for school districts. So the school district must provide a preliminary budget statement to the county auditor by August 10th. So coming up here less than a month. School districts then are required to have a public hearing on its property tax levy no earlier than September 7th. And so the counties now are collecting all those budget worksheets from all the political subs and sending out an estimated tax notice to everyone in the county. So you have to wait until after that's all distributed before you can have your public hearing, but you are required to have that hearing. Final budget is due to the county by October 10th. School districts are the only political sub or tax levying authority that has the ability to increase or decrease that tax levy after their preliminary budget. Every city, county, park district can only go down. They can't go up in their preliminary budget. School districts do have the ability to go up or down for those tax levies. Some of the tax levy authority that you guys have as a district. The general fund levy, you can go up 12% in dollars each year, up to 70 mils. That is a board authority to go up as high as 70 mils, capped at 12% a year. If a district is unable to get to 60 mils because they've been hit by that 12% cap repeatedly, we saw this a lot in the northwest part of the state. We see it occasionally here in random other parts of the state where they have a big tax growth for a year, whether land came on that was previously tax exempt or whatever the case is, that there is an adjustment that you can make to accelerate, because in 3 years everyone will be at 60 mils. Pending any future legislative changes. We heard the 30 mil or talk from Senator Shively. But as it's written now, everyone will be at 60 mils. 60 mils is considered in the formula. So you can levy up to 70. 60 mils is going part of that $10,237 per student. So that means you're really getting to keep or spend 10 of those discretionary mills if you're maxing that out. Some of the other levy authority that a district has, tuition, there is no max rate. This is really designed for your elementary districts around here, Apple Creek, Manning, Naughton, where they tuition their high school students to go to another district, generally Bismarck in this area, that those school districts can levy their taxpayers for the tuition they are required to pay Bismarck. Any judgments against the school district, I have not seen one of those yet since I started. Any special assessments that are levied to the school district, you can then levy onto the taxpayers. Those are all board authority based on your need to pay those bills. The building fund. This is a voter approved fund. So somewhere along the line, the voters had to give the district authority to levy a building fund levy. The most the voters can give the district authority for is 20 mils. So that should never be above 20 mils. The voters can't say 25 mils and 30 mils. That's a max of 20. Once you get that vote though, it's good. It doesn't have to be reauthorized every 10 years or anything like that. Once you have it, we have some that are going back to the 30s and 40s that they have that building fund levy authority. Sinking in interest, there's no max, but the voters give you that 60% vote to bond your construction project, and you can levy whatever it takes to pay off that bond that you got approval for. Special reserve fund, this is your rainy day fund. You can levy up to 3 mils in that fund. Board authority, don't need any voter approval. The max though you can carry in that fund is what 15 mils would generate. So essentially you could do it 3 mils for 5 years. It gets you to 15 mils, but as taxable valuation goes up, you can continue to increase that levy authority. The miscellaneous fund, you can go up to 12 mils. No voter, that's a board election that they can do. The only thing that's about that miscellaneous fund is you got to track what you spend it on. It's a little different than the general fund, but it's basically still unrestricted money. It doesn't have any restrictions other than you just need to track what you're spending that on. And then the safety fund was just passed a couple biennium ago. We still have not had any districts levy this. You can levy up to 5 mils. You need a simple majority of your voters, and it's good for 5 years. So you have to reauthorize it every 5 years. And this is where Senator Shively kind of talked about a mill here in one district might be worth 60,000. Well, that's a lot, 5 mils. Where a mill in another district might be 10,000, 5,000. And so we have not had anyone utilize that yet, but it doesn't need to go to a vote of people. I think I'm running a little late, but the one thing I did want to show up, bring up on the screen, let's see if I can figure this out. I apologize, it's a little small. We do post this on our website. And this is what we call the school equity report. So this is really kind of that summary I gave you of the funding formula. This is the school district summary. So I'll just start at the top here, heading here, and I apologize again for being small. See if I can zoom it in a little. Heading here, their average daily membership. So this is the final one for the 21-22 school year. So I've been using the 2021 average daily membership student enrollment. Average daily membership was 265 students. They got paid for on-time funding. I didn't go into a whole lot of on-time funding, but if you are a growing district, you can generate some more additional students for that on-time funding. So that gets you, then we show the total weighted student units. So the heading here is 351 students. And so that would add all those weights for special education, English language learners, summer school. We do put the tax base per weighted student unit on there so you can see the taxes per district. That should not have any effect on the funding formula anymore because of the 60 mil contribution. And then we get to the total formula, which would be their 351 students times the $10,136 it was last year. Headinger in this case does not have any transition adjustments. They are what we would call an on the formula district. So of the $3.5 million on their funding formula, $920,000 comes from their 60 mil contribution. $49,000 comes from other local revenue. That's that oil and gas, which I don't think get much down there. Wind farms, telecommunications. And then the state pays the $2.5 million to get to the $10,136 on the far right of that screen. But a district that's just, I'm just going to go with the first one that's on these lists. These are ordered by county, Headinger being in Adams County. We'll go to Barnes County North here. Barnes County North has 241 kids. They don't have any on-time funding. And they get paid for then 319 weighted student units, which would give them a formula of $3.2 million. However, because of those transition adjustments that were made for those districts, they have an additional $1.09 million that are basically added on to their formula because they hit a minimum dollar amount they could be funded to. So we add that $1.09 million in. We back up their contribution from property tax of about $1.9 million, their other local revenue of just under $300,000, to get to their state aid payment of $2 million. If we go to the right, their total state and local payment is $4.3 million, which comes to a per pupil payment averaged out at about $13,500 compared to the $10,000. $10,136 that the per pupil weight is set at. So that $1.09 million this year was reduced 15%. So if it would have been last year's, it would have been 15% higher than that. That will continue to get cut 15% each year until that is gone and everyone will be at $10,136. If I scroll to the bottom of this page, and it does have every school district on there. Currently we have 90 school districts that are on that transition minimum adjustment. So it is something I would encourage you to talk with your business manager, your superintendent. Again, or go out to our DPI website. I'd be happy to show you where that's at. Just look at your district. Ensure if you know you're on one, great. But to make sure that if you're on a district that has one, that you can anticipate those cuts coming over the next 6 years. See if I can get on the internet here real quick. Then I'll wrap up my show. So if we go to districts and schools and scroll down to finance and operations, and then go to finance and school district finance, under the school district budgeting tab, excuse me, there is that equity report I just showed you, that district level status report. Then I also create an 8-year comparison so you can see where your district was at since the inception of this funding formula, so you can see the changes over time, what the percent increases have given you in that transition minimum, so you'd be able to see how much of a reduction that was from last year, or from the previous year, from 21 year to 22 school year. But you can look at those comparisons and just kind of help with budgeting purposes. I know we have been communicating this a lot to school district superintendents and business managers, but we see turnover in those positions, and sometimes it doesn't always get commuted all the way up. So I just wanted to make sure we spent some time on that to ensure that districts are preparing budget-wise for those potential changes coming. So are there any questions regarding the funding formula, transportation, construction, or specifically these transition minimum adjustments? Kind of threw a lot at you. Kind of zipped through that a little quick, ran a little over. But all right, well, I'll take that as no questions. I must have done a perfect job explaining it all. So.